Thank you all for joining. We have a great group here today. I'm curious to hear what your questions are, what you're trying to solve, and how we can help you solve them. Virtual security tries to make security easy for developers. We recognize that you're artists, you're creators, you're out there building, cool chat apps, healthcare apps, innovating in your field, and there's no need for you to become security experts. There's no need for you to become cryptologists, as they're called. And so we have done that hard work for you. We've turned very complicated security algorithms into simple lines of code that you can just add into your app. They're all open source SDKs, and we have tools for end-to-end encryption, passwordless authentication, encrypted data storage, immutable data storage that can all be used for mobile apps, desktop, web, IoT, basically anything that you can think of. We really want to secure the whole internet, as crazy as that sounds. So that's actually our goal. And so we're here to take that burden off of you. And speaking of burdensome things, GDPR. GDPR is going to be going into effect May 25th, 2018. And I think it's top of mind for a lot of people, but there are a lot of questions, swirling around. Okay, these 99 articles, what does it mean? What's the intent? What do I, this little app developer over here in the US, really need to do? What should I actually be concerned about? Because it's not really realistic for me to drop everything that I'm doing, halting work on my product to focus on these European regulations that this, government has imposed. So what are the key takeaways here today that we can equip you with to say, here's a checklist of things, so to speak, that you need to be focused on, both on the technical side and also business operations side. So Virtual will be talking about the technical side, technical tools, and what exactly end-to-end encryption, for example, will get you and what it does. And Josh will be talking a little bit more about GDPR in general and giving us the lay of the land and how to have a holistic but practical approach. So Josh, you want to take it from here?
We're going to talk about GDPR, but first, let me tell you who I am. Good Lord, I've been around the block. I was the CEO of a company called Bijoti, ran out of Mach 37. Cyber Accelerator in Herndon, Virginia, where coincidentally I'm about 20 minutes away from right now. I am a member of Mindshare and MissionLink. I've been a blacksmith, a horse dentist. I run a conference besides Delaware. I run a small journal that we're just getting off the ground, Synac Journal of Information Security. If you want to say that I've been and done stuff in this industry for a while, you would be far from wrong. Okay, I was a senior information security analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. I've been around the block. All right. I got interested in compliance quite a few years ago, especially when I was at the Federal Reserve. As you can imagine, compliance is huge there. And there's so many different compliance regimes. And one of them that I learned about that was coming up was not GDPR, because at the time it wasn't there, but it was the Data Privacy Directive, DPD 2500, I think, and Safe Harbor and things like that. And a lot of those things have gone away and been modified, and GDPR is what's come out of all of them. So let's talk about that. So what is GDPR? And this is basically my outline. We're going to go over all sorts of different things, from what is GDPR to where is it to do I actually care, and honestly, can I afford to care? Is GDPR so expensive that I can't afford to bother? I've got other things that I could make money with rather than spend all my time, effort, and money on this. Is this something I care about? That's a good question. So let's talk about that. So GDPR is to make sure that personal data, and that's what it's focused around, is personal data, people's personal data. That's PII or EPHI, and I'm sure you've heard those terms. PII is personally identifiable information. EPHI is electronic personal health information. Basically, data that is about a person under GDPR is owned by the person, and they have to consent to anything you want to do with the data. You want to store it? They've got to agree to it. You want to process it? They've got to agree to it. You want to hold on to it, and they agree to it. You still have to protect it. So there's a lot of things in GDPR, but the basic concept is a person owns their own data and has to consent or have an overriding exception as to why you're using, touching, storing, handling, playing with that data. Okay. You have to make sure that it's, like it says, adequate, relevant, and limited to what's necessary. Okay, I'm not going to read this whole slide, I promise. Please read it. Go ahead while I'm talking. But the idea is that every company that handles data. Now, obviously, a famous one right now is Facebook. Okay, you might have probably have all heard about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. Facebook in Europe has to operate under very different constraints than they do in the US. In the US, Facebook, we've all heard, I'm sure, of, well, Facebook is free. How do they make money? Well, that's because it's free to you. You're the product. Okay. In Europe, that mindset is very shifted. They make money off of ads, but everybody in Europe, in the EU specifically, the European Union, they have to agree to what's going on. And if they don't agree, well, sorry, it's not happening. All right. So anyway, and by the way, one of the most important ones is the second one from the bottom. You have the right to erase data. You have the right to be forgotten. In other words, I can call up Facebook and say, hey, not only do I want a copy of what you have on me, but I want you to forget I was ever there. And that has to be for your doctor, for your hospital, for your social media, for anybody that collects your data. Now, there are exceptions, but they're kind of rare. Basically, life and death exception. If you have a text message on your phone, you know where somebody is committing suicide, or don't get me wrong, I apologize, I'm not trying to be grim, but you get the idea. Life and death exception, governmental necessity exception, the police, that kind of thing. Anyway, another big one is breach, and that's right at the bottom there. If you have a breach, you have 72 hours to inform and communicate all the stakeholders. Wow, this is broad. Like, this is really broad. How do we make sure that we don't have to do a lot of these things, or that we don't have to write all the process and procedure? We don't have to handle all of these. Well, the easiest one is what we're talking about here, is end-to-end encryption. If, and I know I'm sort of stepping on you, Rebecca and David, and I apologize, but the idea is, if somebody has control of their own data, then, and we may hold it, but in an encrypted format, which we don't have the key to, I don't have access to it. I don't have to worry about GDPR, because, other than proving that I'm doing exactly that, holding it encrypted, because it's not my data and I don't have access to it, I don't have to worry. So there are ways to use end-to-end encryption to reduce the burden of GDPR. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Okay. Sorry, rambled a little bit, but kind of important. All right. Now, when does it start? We already talked about this, May 25th, 2018. Let me be very clear. That is not when does the trial period start, when does the test period start, when does the whatever, you get the idea. That was a year ago. It is enforced as of May 25th, 2018. So we have a very, very short amount of time to actually be up to date. Well, okay, do I need to? Well, I mean, I don't know. Do you care about the fines? They have to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. They're really going for the, we're going to punish you and make sure you never do this again. Okay, it's cute, but it makes sense. How do they do that? They're unpleasant. Let me be very clear. They're very unpleasant. Total worldwide annual turnover, that's revenue, not less than 10 to 20 million euro. So that's 15 to 27 million dollars. If I think I've got my exchange rate roughly right. And that's literally the small fine. This will, if a smaller company, up to even a mid-cap company, gets a $20 million fine, $15 million to $25 million fine, they're out of business. So legitimately, they don't want to put people out of business unless they really want to, but they're going to hurt you. 2% of total revenue, not net, gross revenue, that's the smallest fine. That's going to hurt even small businesses. So let's talk about GDPR. What does it actually mean? I mean, we discussed some of the basics, but wow, this is, by the way, is just the table of contents for one of the documents as part of GDPR, okay? This is just about consent. This is just about how you get consent, how it works, consent for a child. If you look over on the right, 7.1, scientific research. This is just one document out of, well, let's just say that I've read through a pile of documents about 2.5 inches thick, and you know, feel pity for my bleeding eyes, okay? So,
Okay.
but,
I feel pity.
yeah, I'm glad. Thank you. It was unpleasant. Let me put it this way. It was a solid week of, oh God, more documentation. Anyway, the idea is that there's very clear and careful constraints around how you can get consent to use somebody's data. All right, if you look at this, it's fairly straightforward. How can someone demonstrate consent? Is there an imbalance of power? Can you say to an employee, hey, you must consent or you lose your job? That's in there. How do you withdraw consent? Once you leave a job, for example, can you call them and say, hey, look, forget I was ever there? The answer, by the way, is yes. Okay, they have to actually delete emails, SIM records for your security and event and incident management system. There's a lot of things that really remain your property, your data, under through some very, very interesting things. I'll tell you one. I just talked to a gentleman the other day who's fantastic at GDPR, and we were discussing IP addresses. Internal IP addresses, which are private IP addresses inside of a company, are PII under GDPR, which means that unless you get consent from all of your employees in a GDPR situation, you can't put any of them into a SIM, a security incident and event management system. You can't do analytics on them. You can't play with them. You can't use them for data for alerts and alarms, which to us in the US seems ridiculous. They're internal, they're corporate, we own them. No, in Europe, the person whose IP address that can be addressed to, or sorry, individuated to, they own them. It's really weird for us in the US. So anyway, let's keep going. Sorry, I don't mean to take forever. So what's the applicability of GDPR? Are you a European Union company? Obviously it applies. Do you have an office in the EU? Obviously it applies. You have an office there. Now, if you're careful with your data, and this is a kicker, I really want you to listen carefully. If you're careful with your data segregation, and your data processing, it could potentially only apply to your EU office. That's where something, like Red Lion, we come in and help people figure out how to do that data segregation. But just wanted to point that out. Are you a non-EU, this is the fun part, are you a non-EU company with no office in the EU, but collect and hold data for the buyers of your product or service? It applies. If you have EU customers, even if you have no EU offices, it applies. Now, is that going to hold true forever? The answer is I don't think so. I think there's going to be some significant court cases here, but they haven't happened yet. At some point, somebody's going to be so egregious about this that the EU authorities are going to try to submit a fine. Basically say, you owe us 10 million euro. And they're going to be like, sorry, I'm a US company. And that's what's going to go to court. But right now, it applies. Until we get a court hearing, it's going to be interesting. And by the way, very, very recent news. Did anybody hear about this new Cloud Act? Rebecca, did you hear about that one?
No, I didn't. Tell us about it.
This is really cool. So the US government has just put through the Cloud Act. And it's got this long stream. It's a backronym, which meant they used specific words to make an acronym. But the Cloud Act basically says that if any foreign government requests any data of a cloud provider here in the US, they must give it to the foreign government so long as the foreign government has a valid warrant. So now this is another reason. Mm-hmm. This is another reason it's called the Cloud Act. This is another reason that something like Virgil with encryption, that you can say to the foreign government, hey, you can have the encrypted blob, but we don't have the key. What do you mean? We don't have the key. That person has the key on their device. You want the key? You're going to have to go to that person and get their device. Well, yeah, but we want the back door. Oh, I'm sorry. we don't have those. and that's the kind of thing with GDPR, with the Cloud Act. These are huge problems for companies that want to remain secure, want to remain with integrity towards their customers. This is why we do these things. Okay. So again, even if you just have an EU user, it applies. Again, that's going to be with the court cases. We'll see. Let's put it that way. I expect this to be a hotly contested area in about 3 to 6 months, somewhere in there. All right. So now let's get into the meat of the matter about where Virgil is and where we are and what we want to talk about. There are two kinds of data that you can, two things you can do to data, rather, I apologize, that matter in terms of GDPR. And one is you can anonymize data, and one is you can pseudonymize data, okay? The difference is, let's say I'm a service provider, okay? I am, but let's just say it anyway. So, if I am holding data for a client and I have no way of accessing the data, I don't know what the data is about. I may know it's Jimmy's data, but I don't know what Jimmy wrote. I don't know anything about the people in this data set. Sorry about the trucks going by. I don't know anything about this data other than I'm holding a blob of data. I can't get it, I can't read it, etc. It's anonymized. Pseudonymized data is I'm holding Jimmy's data and there's a key over there in the corner. If I go grab the key, I can unlock the data and look at it and find out and read it and see it and do all that stuff. That's pseudonymization. Okay. And there's different ways that the GDPR says to handle this. And it's interesting because when it comes to Virgil, you can have anonymized data where Virgil and you don't have any of the keys. You can have pseudonymized data where you have access to a key. There's all kinds of ways this works. But I want to make it clear that you have to understand the difference between anonymized and pseudonymized. It's kind of really important for GDPR, okay? And part of the reason is that pseudonymized data, you look at the bottom paragraph there, Article 6.4e, no, I'm not joking, permits the processing of pseudonymized data for uses beyond the purpose for which the data was originally collected. And I'll go over what pseudonymized data looks like in a second, and we can explain that. So let's, actually, I'll get to that in a minute. But I also wanted to talk about something that was very important to people when we did a HIPAA webinar. All right, and this is the conduit exception. So the conduit exception for HIPAA, I'll explain why I'm switching back and forth in a second, but the conduit exception for HIPAA says, all I do is transfer data that I can't get at. We're talking about anonymized data here, because I can't get at it, from him to them. That's it. That's all I do. So I don't have any way of reading the data. I don't have any way of touching the data. I don't have to be GDPR compliant because I don't actually have access to any real data. So that's cool. And that works. This is the GDPR paragraph about that. Okay. By the way, I can't see the chat. If anybody has a question, please throw it in chat, and Rebecca and or David will stop me and tell me the question.
Will do. Yeah, feel free to send your questions through. I'll be reading them.
Appreciate that. So they act as a mere conduit, all right? And if you're a conduit, like Twilio can be, like Virgil can be, like those, sorry, not Virgil, but Twilio, or any of the various different service providers can be, you don't have to be GDPR compliant. And we can discuss that. It's still something you should have an attestation of. This is the reason why we claim the conduit exception. But it is possible that you could be a service provider without having to be GDPR compliant, even in the EU. So in this way, I didn't change HIPAA, my bad. Encrypted information is anonymized, and it's not PII, okay? All right, so let's talk about de-identification. And this is where we're going to discuss pseudonymized data in just a minute, all right? I love this quote. If you have 3 data points, a 5-digit zip code, gender, and date of birth, I can probably identify who you, specifically you are. And that's terrifying, okay? It's amazing considering that there was a company called Axiom, AXCIOM, if I remember correctly, that about 10 years ago, maybe 20, I'm getting old, I swear, swore that they had 65 data points about every American. So with only 3, they can individuate you. With 65, they can probably tell, where you're going for lunch today, okay? But what we want to do, that means we want to make sure that the data we do send around is really, really well protected. So can we secure data during transfer with data masking? That's basically changing or enciphering the data. No. Can we encrypt it and protect it? Absolutely. If it's encrypted, it's protected, okay? There's a reason for this. Bear with me. Static data. Has anybody here heard of, in HIPAA, they put it beautifully, and I love this quote. You need to protect data in transit and at rest. And a lot of different compliance regimes are using the in transit and at rest sort of paradigm because it really makes sense. So we just talked about during transfer, that's at rest. During transfer, that's in transit, and static data is at rest. Can we use data masking, which is pseudonymizing the data, okay, enabling me to unmask it later if I want to? Is that good enough to protect it at rest? Yes, because I can move the key over in the corner, give it to Virgil, whatever, and it's protected. It's fine. The person who breaks in can't get at the data. If I encrypt it, is it protected? Obviously. Again, I can still give Virgil the key to that, and we're good. But here's the kicker. Continuous availability of data for applications. Now, this is the hard part. I have a database. I want to make sure that I can use the data in the database. Can it be encrypted and I can still use it in the database? The answer is no. Can I mask it? Yes, because I can have a demasking routine built in, or I can use some of the data masked. I don't have to know your name to use the data and analyze how many people were born in 1985 or earlier. I just have to make sure that the date of birth is unmasked. Okay, but there's a problem here. Because if you use a properly handled key management system, and if you properly strategize your data before you start the system, before you start putting the data in the database, you can actually process encrypted data because you don't have to encrypt every single thing. You can treat encryption like data masking to a certain degree if you properly plan. Let's take a look at what that means. So right now I've got on the screen clear text, name, Joshua Marpet, date of birth, a date of birth that I have no idea whose it is, and an SSN that is not even remotely like mine. So I can encode that text in base 64 UTF-8, and that's what it looks like, TKFNRT, right? Blah, 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 blah. I can encrypt that data, and that's what that looks like, KDL with a thing, O with a not an umlaut, an accent mark. You get the idea, all right? But can I
Josh,
reverse? Sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm glad to hear that those are not your real data points, or not your real social and date of birth. I was about to lose a lot of faith.
I'm not the guy from LifeLock, okay? Which, by the way, just FYI, as much as LifeLock says they do a good job, he had like 3 different lines of credit opened under his name by other people. So we're just going to say that maybe LifeLock is something you want to investigate before you actually use. Anyway, let's talk about the reversibility. And I'm trying to hurry up. I know I'm taking forever. I apologize, Rebecca. So I can reverse things. What does that mean? Well, if I encode to base 64, I can decode from base 64. It is a reversible encryption. And if you look over on the left, you see A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You'll notice that below that they took hello. And all they did was convert it to the opposite letters, B to O, E to R, H to U, and L to Y. So it's U, R, Y, Y, B, but you can easily reverse that, or ROT13 as it's known, to the opposite side of the alphabet, okay? And that's reversible. That's enciphering. And you can look at the bottom right here, and you can see that's the decoded version of that base 64 string, TKFNRT. Now let's look at an encryption. This is how you encrypt. No, I'm not joking. This is the basic cheat sheet with incredibly simplified versions. And on the right, on the vertical, you can see that's where I got it from. If you want to learn what AES 256 encryption is, this is a fantastic comic about how to do AES 256 encryption. It's really well written. It is actually correct. I've had cryptographers double check it. And it's fascinating. But let me just put it this way. Ignore this. Because honestly, all you have to do is take one thing, or 2 things rather. One, it's not going to be decrypted as long as your key is good enough. There are more possibilities than atoms in the universe, okay? And 2, it is not reversible. You can't reverse it like you can the base 64. Does that make sense to everybody? So what does that mean? It means that once I encrypt something, unless I give them the key, they cannot reverse it. So that's tough. That is hard to be very compliant and secure, isn't it? I mean, it's like pulling a rock up a hill. But actually, no, it's not. Because there are ways you can do these things. It is possible to do, all right? So, I mean, I'm confused. You've showed me how hard it is, but you've also told me it's not that hard. I mean, well, I never said it's not that hard. It's difficult because you have to plan, because you actually have to think about it beforehand. And I realize that so many projects these days are throw money at it, or how can we do this with no money? Or, oh my God, can you turn it out? Can we be in production in 3 days? And I know none of you have ever had to deal with that. Twitch. But let's talk about planning the data. This is the same slide as before. We've got clear text, encoded text, and AES encrypted text. Okay? Now let's do it differently. Can I encode it or encrypt it, but leave some text exposed? What if all I care about is the date of birth? What if all I care about is the year of birth? So I can not encrypt the year of birth and leave everything else encrypted or encoded or whatever for pseudonymization and anonymization. Remember we talked about that? I can do this if I realize that just the date of birth is not PII, because it's not. It's not enough data to individuate. But it is enough that I can classify my data. And when a researcher calls and says, hey, and I'm just making this up, bear with me, I need every piece of data you've got about people born before 1982. This one would qualify. He was born in 1973. So we can extract all those records out and send them, and then have them get the key from the keeper of the keys, whomever that is, so they can decrypt the data. We still haven't seen the data. We do not have PII, okay? But we're able to sort, use, process data to a certain extent without actually seeing PII. This is a very simplistic example. Please understand, I'm not saying this is it. But again, this goes back to planning your data. Does that make sense to everybody? And does it anybody have any questions on that so far? Okay, cool. If you have questions, please keep typing. Again, I can't see them right now.
Yeah,
But
please
that's
do.
the
I don't see
idea
any
behind,
questions yet.
okay, that's the idea behind planning your data. Sit down and discuss what you're going to be doing with it. Discuss what other people are going to be doing with it. Third parties that you might deal with, partners, your users, your end users. If you can plan out the use of your data prior to actually putting it into practice, you're going to be under so much, you're going to be so much a better place, if that makes sense. Okay? So, you have to understand your data, communicate how it's going to be used, get consent, and structure that data. That's what we just talked about, being able to see the birth date, for example. You have to appoint a data protection officer. Oh my God, well, you've already got an IT manager or compliance manager or somebody. They're now the data protection officer. Alternatively, I will be very honest, Red Lion offers a virtual compliance officer. We're a data protection officer for, well, I'm not going to go into it. I don't talk about our clients. For policies and procedures, by the way, there's a neat little sort of hack. If you are told that you need to be GDPR, excuse me, or you think you're going to be, or you're worried about it for any reason, start doing ISO. I've talked to a lot of people who are handling GDPR. I've dealt with a lot of companies that are handling GDPR. And if we start with ISO, which are understandable and fairly clear cut to a lot of people, even in the US, ISO 27001, yeah, we've been dealing with that for, dear God, 15 or 20 years now. Okay, I know ISO 27001, or I've heard of it, or whatever. If you get ISO 27001 certified, and ISO 20, which is information security, of course, and ISO 27018, which is privacy and handling of personal data certified, it literally takes a handful of other documents, and you are GDPR compliant. So this is a great place to start, and that's a great hack, because a lot of people in information security already understand the ISO standards. Let's go there first. Gives us extra certifications, helps us with sales that we have here in the US, because now we can claim in our marketing, hey, we're ISO 27001 compliant. Hey, we're ISO 27018 compliant, handling personal data. These are great for marketing. These are great for sales. They reduce sales friction. They increase marketing collateral ability. These are good things. This should be a revenue center or a sales driver, not a cost center and something you dread. Okay, I want to be clear on this. These are useful in a lot of ways. And we've helped companies make millions of dollars off of these standards because they go, we finished and it was a pain in the butt. And I go, yeah, it really was. And they go, and we made 5 sales within several weeks after finishing and getting our gold seal of approval. And I'm like, yeah, that's what happens. And they freak out. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, you put an investment into something that was important, not just to you, but to your customers. When you put that investment in and your customers realize my data is important to them, your prospects will become customers, your customers will become lifetime customers, and your lifetime customers will never, ever leave. All right, so we realize that you take your valuable time out to be with us, and we want to give you something back. And I'm going to let Rebecca and David talk about that. But basically, we want to make sure that you know that we appreciate this, and we hope that you found some value in the information that we've given, and that I ramble on about, and I apologize again. But I'll let Rebecca talk about that. So Rebecca, let me finish my screen sharing here.
In addition to Josh, we also have David from Virtual Security. And so you've heard from Josh a lot about GDPR and the compliance checklist that was at the last on the last slide, what exactly that means from an overall comprehensive view. And I think one question that we want to answer here today is, what does secure mean? And how do you make your data secure in a practical sense? So David, if you'd like to say a few words about what exactly that means for us and how we see virtual security tools fitting in to that picture for developers who are on this call today.
Thank you, Rebecca. And hi, everyone. I wanted to walk you guys through what is really end-to-end encryption. And so Josh explained how you can, in summary, how you can use technology to see the minimum amount of data that you have to see and make your compliance easier and simpler and faster. What I'd like to show you is what is that technology, what is end-to-end encryption, and how you can start using it today. all these chat applications are using end-to-end encryption, and they are well prepared for the Cloud Act, or the one that Josh and Rebecca explained, where every U.S. company have to give out data to even foreign governments with a legal warrant. These chat applications have been long prepared for that use case, and they could not give data out because it's end-to-end encrypted. End-to-end encryption is here to stay. It's a really powerful technology that I hope you guys will soon implement in your applications. This is the difference. And this is really just a 1 mile overview of how an application looks like today. So you have two mobile applications, two users, let's say in a chat conversation. And this is how your application is built today by using HTTPS and at-rest encryption on your database in the cloud. One mobile device sends a message to the other one, and it goes through a server. HTTPS is used to encrypt that data while it's going through the internet, but when it arrives to your backend servers in the cloud or in your data center, that encryption ends, it terminates. And your web servers will be able to see the data, will have keys to access the data, and then your database will have access to that data too. This is where data gets breached out. Even if you encrypt data at rest on your database server, that encryption key for the database engine is there, sitting next to the data, so that the database engine can access your database and your records. So there are so many ways that this data can be breached out on the web front ends, on the database server, and between. And this is something that also you must provide access to the data that you are seeing. That's how every app built today. In contrast, end-to-end encryption encrypts data on the mobile device, not only for transport over the wire, but throughout the entire journey. So if this is a chat message, the mobile user on the left-hand side encrypts the data, and then it will be the encrypted data that will travel up to your web server. And it will be the encrypted data that will be stored in your database, and it will be the encrypted data that will travel down to the other user's phone, who will, at the end of the journey, decrypt that piece of data using the key management that you can implement with our SDKs. This way, your cloud service provider, yourself, your database service provider will never be able to access that data. You won't be able to accidentally breach out. Nobody will be able to hack it out of your system, and the Cloud Act won't apply to you. Well, you will hand over encrypted data, but not the actual clear data. And if I look at some really cool initiatives and applications that have already implemented that, you can see that these 2-3 applications or companies that I'll be listing here are using end-to-end encryption, not just for compliance and data security, but also for a key differentiator, a key feature to their users. These guys, Capital Bells, built Cloakroom, the WhatsApp, similar to WhatsApp chat app in Capitol Hill and in the White House. This is what politicians in the US use to chat during session. These guys, as part of Hasselplatter Institute in Germany, they built this end-to-end encrypted health records system, which is connecting health mobile apps with each other and end-to-end encrypting patient records in their database, which means that they are not just going to be simpler to be GDPR compliant, but also they will never be able to breach out patient data as many healthcare companies do accidentally today. And if you're not in the app space or in the web or mobile app space, we also have really good examples in the IoT space, especially for medical devices, where it's crucial that your data is kept secure. Sora is is one of our IoT customers. We're encrypting the sensors that are the sensory data that are coming into this light bulb, like speech and movement and light, and then encrypting it and only decrypting it on the other bulb who needs to cooperate with this bulb, or for the end users when they want to analyze their data. So that's the intro I wanted to give about end-to-end encryption, and if I just fast forward my slides, I also wanted to show you a special offer that Red Lion and Virgil came up with recently. Sign up for any paid plan for Virgil Security, and we'll cover 2 hours of GDPR consultancy on us. If you want to take this forward with Josh, that's the gift that Josh referred. It can be any paid plan in here. We'll be very happy to move you guys to the next stage, and I think there are a couple of questions in here as well, which it looks like Josh already replied. So there's a question here: does GDPR compliance require confirmation from some regulatory authority to make sure that we're actually being compliant? Josh, do you want to take that over? And with that, I'm putting a period at the end of my sentence and intro and handing it over back to Josh and Rebecca.
The idea is, does GDPR compliance require confirmation from some regulatory authority to make sure that we're actually being compliant? Great, good question. So the answer is yes and no, and that's a horrible answer, and I'm sorry. But the reality is that it goes back to part of the things that we were talking about. If you have no EU offices, no EU, whatever, does it still apply? Yes, because you're collecting data from EU citizens. Well, but you're not an EU company. How can they come over and certify me? So it's awkward. So what we do is, and I've been advocating this, is do your ISO certifications, where the ISO certifications, we have a whole community of ISO auditors and ISO certifiers, if you will, here in the US. And once we get ISO certified, again, with ISO 27001 and 27018, we are 90% of the way, 95% of the way, I think a very GDPR compliance, and we've gotten those extra certifications along the way from people that are recognized here in the US, okay? And we have a community of them. Right now, there's very few people that can really say with some confidence their GDPR certification or attestation of compliance accepted. And we're still actually exploring all of that, okay? In other words, if I have a no EU office, do I need a GDPR certification? So basically, the EU is encouraging member states to come up with their own certifications, okay? So there's, about the member states for a second. There's the UK, there's Germany. That's what we mean by member states, okay, the actual countries. So we're not an EU country in the US, but they're encouraging the member states to come up with their own certifications. Does that mean the US will come up with a GDPR certification? I don't know. That's a good question. But UK, there's an Information Commissioner's Office. There's Germany, I forget, it's Data Protection Office, but it's in a long word in German. I apologize, I don't know what it is. But basically, there's no real certifying body, but as time goes on, the individual countries, member states, will be setting up their certifying bodies. So right now, what we can do is we can get you to the point where you have the ISO certifications we talked about. We can have an attestation of compliance by your compliance consultants. And we can say, to the best of our knowledge, you are as compliant as you can get. Now, in 5 years from now, will that matter to somebody who's doing business in the UK? Might not. You might have to go through I think it's the ICO in the UK to actually be certified. Does that make sense? I apologize. I know that was a little long-winded, but it's a complex answer. Moaz, did that make sense? And if I'm mangling your name, I apologize. Okay, good. So the answer is right now, no. Over time, that answer will change to yes. Sorry, that's I guess a better, shorter answer.
And I think that speaks to how suddenly this has come on for people, and how people are really grasping to quickly get on board and quickly understand and quickly get into compliance. And we'll probably see a lot of changes, including lawsuits, Josh, like you mentioned, come out as as the EU does try to enforce these regulations for the first, second, third times.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's going to be fascinating. I don't know if we're going to see class action lawsuits, but I have this absolute premonition. We're going to see some significantly large lawsuits from large companies. And I know I'm picking on Facebook, but Facebook Europe, if they don't sue, it's going to be interesting. And Facebook US, what if somebody has a home in the UK, but they started their account when they were living in California? And now they live in the UK. Does that count as all the Facebook needs to be GDPR compliant because of them? There's going to be lawsuits all up and down, all the way up to The Hague. So it's going to be fun, interesting, and fascinating, and not fun in a lot of ways too. I think the regulations are interesting, so I'm weird. What can I say? I'm sorry.
Well, and I also think it depends on where you're located, and what you need to do to get up to speed. Here in the U.S., we've been a little lax on allowing data controllers, such as Facebook and companies, to run wild a little bit with what they collect and what they do with that data that they collect. And users have been a little in the dark about everything that's been going on. Whereas over in Europe, uh, countries are a little bit more strict. And so getting up to speed with GDPR is not as big of a lift. But more generally, I think that these GDPR regulations really reflect a rising trend, that users are starting to demand more transparency and more control. And so, tied directly to this conversation, even if you feel like you don't need to comply for whatever reason, you don't have EU users, yada yada yada, other questions that I'll talk about in a sec. uh, End-to-end encryption and other privacy mechanisms are really becoming a feature that differentiate apps. For example, WhatsApp, like David mentioned, is end-to-end encrypted, and people like using it for that reason. People like using Signal for that reason. People like using Telegram, because they feel like finally I'm in control a little bit. And that will grow, and that will cross industries. It'll cross into commerce. It'll cross into fashion, into everything really, as users take back a little bit of control that they've lost. And so as you're building your apps, I think compliance is a huge issue, but more importantly and more significantly for the long run, we're really talking about app differentiators and appealing to your end users and what they really want, which is now becoming
Rebecca,
control and privacy.
you could I got to speak up. I have to agree with you massively. Facebook's lost over $100 billion of value in the last few days as a kickback from what's going on. I have probably 3 or 4 encrypted chat and one I use in a browser. Basically, I use Signal, I use Telegram, I've used Threema, although I don't use it anymore. And as a matter of fact, a company that went through Mach 37 with Virgil and myself, CYPH, they have an in-browser ephemeral chat app that does amazingly well and leaves no trace on the computer. People love it. Okay, so you've got a lot of sales opportunities here, a lot of marketing opportunities here if you build your application around the idea of end-to-end encryption. It's huge.
And so on that note, so next steps, I think we've talked a little broadly about what GDPR is and app security and all of that. And compliance is very personalized and customized for each app. And so we're here to help you. We're here to sort through the noise a little bit, but it will be necessary to collect a little bit of information about you or not you personally, about your app, to understand, do you need to be compliant, or are you already compliant? How can we help you? Is it going to be a big project, a small project? And again, we don't want to drag you into a months long back and forth. We really want to make this as quick as possible and as clear as possible. So I'll be sending out a little quick survey. It's just a few questions to learn a little bit more about where you're located, where your users are located, and then we'll take a look at those questions and see if we can help you. If we can, then I'll send you another survey to learn a little bit more about your business operations. Again, this is super easy, super fast. Just, kind of what languages are you using? What kind of processes, business operations do you have going on? And where could the liabilities be? And then how can end-to-end encryption help you? And then how can Josh help you? And again, back to the special offer that we have. We just think these two things go hand in hand. So I said, thank you for joining today. We're trying to make it seamless and package deal. And production plan starts at $50 a month, and that gets you up to 2,500 users. So that's a pretty good deal. Do we have any closing questions? And obviously, feel free to stay in touch with us. We'd love for you to join our Slack channel. Love for you to email us with questions. Our engineers are on the Slack channel. I'll send out the link to that as well. While we're here, any questions? All right. Well, again, I'm Rebecca. I'm Director of Growth and Business Operations at Virtual Security. Big thank you to Josh from Redline and David also from Virtual Security. Thank you for those email addresses in the chat. And happy that you all joined us today. Hope it was helpful and look forward to walking down this GDPR compliance road together.